The humid air of the Mekong Delta in 1967 didn't just carry the scent of rot and gunpowder. It carried the stench of betrayal. American GIs, drafted into the green hell of the Vietnam War, were promised a miracle. They were handed a sleek black rifle made of space-age plastic and aluminum, told it was a self-cleaning marvel that would outmatch the rugged AK-47. But as the jungle canopy erupted in tracer fire, that promise turned into a death sentence. To understand the history of the M16 rifle, you have to look at the photos that the Pentagon tried to suppress. Young men found dead in the mud, their rifles disassembled, clutching a cleaning rod they were never supposed to need. This wasn't just a mechanical failure, it was a systemic collapse. The Vietnam War weaponry debate remains one of the most scandalous chapters in military history. On one side stood the brilliant inventor Eugene Stoner, who envisioned a lightweight, high-velocity instrument of precision. On the other, a stubborn military bureaucracy that took a masterpiece and, through a series of cost-saving and traditionalist changes, turned it into a jam-prone liability. Today, we peel back the layers of the M16 scandal to ask the ultimate question. Was the M16 reliability sacrificed due to sheer incompetence, or was it a deliberate act of sabotage by the old guard? Part 1. The Space-Age Rifle. In the mid-1950s, the U.S. Army was stuck in the past. The standard issue M14 was a heavy wooden beast firing the powerful 7.62mm NATO round, essentially a refined M1 Garand from World War II. It was accurate at long ranges, but in the dense, close-quarters brush of Southeast Asia, it was uncontrollable in full auto and cumbersome to carry. The Eugene Stoner revolution changed everything. Working for ArmaLite, a small division of Fairchild Engine and Airplane Corporation, Stoner applied aircraft engineering to small arms. He used 7075 T6 aluminum and reinforced plastics, creating the AR-15. It was a rifle that looked like it belonged on a sci-fi set, not a battlefield. The core of Stoner's genius was the direct gas impingement system. By venting high-pressure gases from the barrel directly into the bolt carrier, he eliminated the need for a heavy gas piston. This made the rifle incredibly light, under 7 pounds, and allowed for a straight-line recoil design that kept the muzzle flat during rapid fire. When General Curtis LeMay first saw the AR-15 at a 4th of July watermelon shoot, he was mesmerized. He saw the future. The Air Force wanted it immediately, and soon, Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara saw the AR-15 as the perfect universal rifle for all branches. But the U.S. Army Ordnance Corps, the old guard of gun design, felt insulted. To them, a rifle made of pudding and tin was a toy, not a weapon of war. They cherished the M14 and loathed the idea of a, quote, civilian engineer like Stoner telling them how to build a firearm. This friction created a toxic environment where the AR-15 was not seen as a solution, but as an intruder. The stage was set for a clash between visionary engineering and bureaucratic ego, a clash that would eventually be paid for in American blood in the jungles of the Ia Drang Valley and beyond. The early tests of the AR-15 were glowing. Soldiers loved the lethality of the small, high-velocity 5.56mm round, which tumbled upon impact, creating devastating wounds. It was easy to shoot, easy to carry, and seemingly reliable. However, as the rifle transitioned from the AR-15 to the XM16E1, the Army began making minor adjustments without Stoner's consent. They changed the twist rate of the rifling, they added a heavy forward assist, and most fatefully, they messed with the very lifeblood of the weapon, the gunpowder. This was the moment the space-age rifle began its descent into the Vietnam scandal. Part 2. The Pentagon's Sabotage. Imagine designing a high-performance Ferrari engine tuned specifically for high-octane racing fuel. Now imagine a bureaucrat deciding, without telling you, to run that engine on cheap, dirty diesel to save a few cents per gallon. That is exactly what the U.S. Army Ordnance Corps did to the M16. This wasn't just a technical oversight, it was a bureaucratic ambush that would cost thousands of lives in the humidity of Southeast Asia. The heart of the scandal lies in a substance called ball powder. When Eugene Stoner designed the AR-15, he calibrated the entire gas-operated system for IMR 4475 smokeless powder. It was clean burning and produced a specific pressure curve. However, the Army's propellant specialists at the Olin Mathieson Chemical Corporation had a massive surplus of WC-846 ball powder. Despite Stoner's frantic warnings that this powder was unsuitable, the Army mandated its use for all 5.56mm ammunition. The result was catastrophic. Ball powder burned differently, creating a massive spike in port pressure. This increased the M16's cyclic rate from a manageable 750 rounds per minute to a violent 1,000 rounds per minute. The rifle was literally tearing itself apart. The bolt moved so fast that it would often try to extract the spent casing while it was still pressurized and expanded against the chamber walls. This led to the dreaded failure to extract, leaving a torn brass casing jammed in the chamber while the next round slammed into its rear. But the powder wasn't just too powerful, it was dirty. Ball powder contained calcium carbonate additives that left a thick, sticky residue throughout the rifle's internal gas tube and bolt carrier. In the 90% humidity of a Vietnamese monsoon, this residue turned into a corrosive sludge. Stoner had originally envisioned a rifle that required minimal maintenance, but with this poisoned ammunition, the M16 needed constant surgical cleaning to function for more than a few magazines. Then came the second betrayal, the cost-cutting of the barrel. In the 1960s, it was standard practice to chrome-line the chambers and bores of service rifles to prevent corrosion and easing extraction. Yet, the Army Ordnance Corps decided to skip this process for the initial M16 production runs. They claimed it was to save money and simplify manufacturing. In the tropical heat of Vietnam, an unchromed steel chamber pitted and rusted within days, acting like sandpaper on the brass casings and making jams inevitable. To make matters worse, the Army's marketing machine committed a crime of arrogance. They told the troops that the M16 was a, quote, space-age marvel, so advanced it was, quote, self-cleaning. Early shipments of the rifle were sent to the front lines without any cleaning kits, no bore brushes, and no lubricant. Soldiers were told they didn't need them. It was a lethal lie. Young men, some just 19 years old, were sent into the densest jungles on Earth with a weapon that was chemically and mechanically destined to fail. The final insult was the, quote, forward assist. Stoner hated it. He argued that if a round didn't chamber properly, you shouldn't force it, you should clear the jam. But the Army insisted on adding a plunger to the side of the rifle to manually hammer the bolt closed. This didn't fix the underlying problem of the dirty powder or the rusted chambers. It simply gave the soldier a way to jam around even tighter into a fouled weapon, making the eventual malfunction even harder to clear under fire. The stage was set for a tragedy of epic proportions. Part 3. The Jungle Hell. The humid, oppressive air of the Central Highlands in 1966 was a breeding ground for more than just malaria and leeches. It was a laboratory for a mechanical catastrophe. As American troops pushed deeper into the Iron Triangle, they carried with them a weapon that had been marketed as a miracle of modern engineering. They were told it was self-cleaning, a lie so pervasive that many units were never issued cleaning kits. No brushes, no rods, no solvent. Just a sleek black rifle and a promise that it wouldn't fail. But the jungle doesn't care about marketing brochures. The combination of the high calcium ball powder and the lack of a chrome-lined chamber created a chemical nightmare. When the rifle fired, the dirty powder left a thick, sticky residue in the gas tube in the chamber. In the tropical heat, this carbon fouled the weapon at an alarming rate. After just a few magazines, the chamber would pit and corrode. The brass casing of a fired round would expand, gripping the rusted walls of the chamber like a weld. This was the dreaded failure to extract. The bolt would cycle back, but the extractor claw would simply rip the rim off the stuck casing, leaving the spent shell jammed deep inside the barrel. The rifle was now a useless stick of plastic and aluminum. To fix it, a soldier had to find a long rod, insert it into the muzzle, and physically hammer the casing out. In the middle of an ambush, with NVA regulars closing in with reliable AK-47s, this was a death sentence. The reports filtering back from the front lines were haunting. Sergeants began writing letters to their families, not about the politics of the war, but about the damn plastic toy that was getting their men killed. One famous letter, later read before Congress, described a squad found dead in a ditch. They hadn't been overrun by a superior force. They had been executed while trying to disassemble their jammed rifles. Beside them lay their cleaning rods, their last desperate tools for survival. The psychological toll was devastating. Soldiers lost faith in their primary means of defense. Some began carrying heavy cleaning rods taped to their handguards. Others sought out old M16s or even captured SKS rifles, anything they could trust to fire when the trigger was pulled. The space-age rifle had become a symbol of bureaucratic negligence. The men in the foxholes knew something was fundamentally wrong, but the leadership in the Pentagon continued to insist that the failures were the fault of the soldiers' poor maintenance. The reality was much darker. The Army's Ordnance Corps had knowingly ignored the warnings of the rifle's designer, Eugene Stoner. They had changed the powder to save money and meet production quotas, and they had skipped the expensive chroming process because they believed the M16 was a short-term solution until their own projects were ready. They were playing a game of logistics and budgets, but the currency they were spending was the lives of 18-year-old boys in the mud of the Washoe Valley. As the body count rose, the scandal could no longer be contained by the brass. The image of a dead Marine with a cleaning rod in his hand became an indictment of the entire military-industrial complex. The black rifle wasn't just malfunctioning, it was being sabotaged by the very institution that issued it. The stage moved from the jungle to the halls of Washington, D.C., where a furious congressional subcommittee was about to demand answers for the blood on the Pentagon's hands. Part 4. The Congressional Investigation. The Blood on the Floor. By 1967, the silence of the Pentagon was shattered, not by enemy fire, but by the desperate letters of young men. One soldier wrote to his family, "I was the only one in my squad whose rifle didn't jam. We found the others dead, their M16s broken down beside them." These letters reached the desks of congressmen, and the black rifle scandal exploded into the public consciousness. The United States was losing its sons because their government had issued them a defective tool. The Ichord Committee, led by Representative Richard Ichord, was formed to investigate the disaster. What they uncovered was a masterclass in bureaucratic arrogance and criminal negligence. The hearings were tense, filled with the smell of political gunpowder. Army officials were forced to sit across from a committee that demanded to know why the M16 was failing in the mud of Vietnam while it had passed the tests in the air-conditioned labs of Maryland. The investigation revealed that the Army's Ordnance Corps had treated the M16 as an unwanted stepchild. They hated Eugene Stoner's design because it didn't come from their own engineers. To fix it, they had changed the powder in the cartridges from the clean-burning IMR powder Stoner specified to a cheaper, dirtier ball powder. This single decision increased the rate of fire beyond the rifle's mechanical limits and coated the internal parts with a sticky carbon soot that acted like glue in the humid jungle air. The committee was horrified to learn that the Army had marketed the rifle as self-cleaning to the troops. This was a lie of lethal proportions. Soldiers were never issued cleaning kits, brushes, or oil during the first critical years of the war. They were told the rifle was a space-age marvel that required no maintenance. When the rifles inevitably choked on the foul residue of the wrong powder, The boys in the foxholes had nothing but their bare hands and cleaning rods to try and clear the failure to extract malfunctions. Perhaps the most damning evidence was the lack of chrome plating. Every major military rifle of the era had a chrome-lined chamber to prevent corrosion, especially in tropical climates. The Ordnance Corps had skipped this feature to save a few dollars per unit. Without chrome, the M16's chamber pitted and rusted almost instantly. When a round fired, the brass casing would expand and weld itself to the rough, rusted walls of the chamber. The extractor would then rip the rim off the casing, leaving the soldier with a useless piece of plastic and aluminum. The Ichord Committee's final report was a scathing indictment. It stated that the reliability of the M16 rifle was seriously impaired by the use of ball powder, and that the failure to provide cleaning instructions was unbelievable. The investigation concluded that the deaths of American soldiers were directly linked to these management failures. It wasn't just a technical glitch. It was a systemic collapse of the military-industrial complex that prioritized budget and tradition over the lives of the men on the front lines. As the hearings concluded, the message was clear. The M16 had to change, or it had to go. The blood of the dead with cleaning rods was on the hands of the bureaucrats in Washington. The Pentagon was forced into a corner. They had to fix the black rifle or face a total revolt from the public and the troops. The result of this pressure would be the birth of a new version of the weapon, but for thousands of soldiers, the fix came years too late. Part 5. The Evolution of a Phoenix. By 1967, the stench of scandal had reached the halls of Congress. The Ichord Committee investigation had ripped the veil off the Army's negligence, exposing how bureaucratic stubbornness and cost-saving powder changes had turned a brilliant design into a liability. The ultimatum was clear: fix the rifle or scrap the entire program. Under immense pressure, the Ordnance Corps and Colt began a frantic salvage operation to transform the AR-15 from a Mattel toy into a professional instrument of war. The first and most critical fix was the chrome cure. For years, experts had warned that the humid, salty air of Southeast Asia would eat away at the M16's unlined steel. Finally, the Army listened. They began chrome plating the chamber, and later, the entire bore. This single change drastically reduced the failure to extract errors. Cartridge cases no longer stuck to the walls of the chamber like they were glued there, and cleaning became 10 times easier. It was a simple solution that should have been implemented in 1963. Next came the propellant. The Army finally moved away from the dirty, high-pressure ball powder that had caused the fouling and the lethal increase in the rate of fire. By returning to a powder closer to Eugene Stoner's original specification, the M16's internal mechanics stopped beating themselves to death. The violent cycling slowed down, parts breakage decreased, and the weapon started to hum with the smooth, rhythmic precision its designer had originally intended. But the most visible change was the birth of the M16A1. This wasn't just a minor tweak, it was a rebranding of the weapon's soul. The most iconic addition was the forward assist, that teardrop-shaped plunger on the right side of the receiver. While Stoner himself hated it, calling it a crutch for a dirty rifle, it gave soldiers a psychological sense of control. If the bolt didn't go into battery, they could now manually force it home. Simultaneously, the Army finally addressed the self-cleaning lie. They flooded the front lines with cleaning kits, specialized brushes, and lubricants. But they didn't stop there. In one of the most famous moves in military history, they issued a comic book-style manual titled The M16A1 Rifle, Operation and Preventive Maintenance. Drawn by legendary artist Will Eisner, it used humor and pin-up-style illustrations to teach 19-year-old grunts that their rifle was a beautiful lady that required constant attention and plenty of lube. The result was a total 180-degree turn in the weapon's reputation. By 1969 and 1970, reports of jamming began to plummet. Soldiers who had once cursed the black rifle now praised its lightweight and lethal accuracy. The M16A1 had emerged from the ashes of the Vietnam controversy as a world-class service rifle. It was no longer an experimental disaster, but a refined platform that would go on to serve as the blueprint for Western small arms for the next half-century. However, the Phoenix had a high price. The evolution of the M16 was not paid for in research grants or laboratory hours. It was paid for in the lives of the soldiers who died in 1965 and 1966, clutching jammed rifles with cleaning rods stuck down the barrels. The M16A1 was a success, but it was a success born from a tragedy that never should have happened. It stands as a testament to the fact that, in the world of firearms, engineering is only half the battle. The other half is honesty. Part 6. The Price of Arrogance. The Final Verdict. The smoke of the Vietnam War has long since cleared, but the echoes of the M16 scandal still vibrate through the halls of the Pentagon and the firing ranges of the world. What we witnessed in the 1960s wasn't just a technical glitch or a string of bad luck. It was a systemic collapse. It was the moment where bureaucratic ego and corporate negligence collided with the brutal reality of the front line. And the impact of that collision was measured in the lives of young men who died screaming in the mud, holding a space-age rifle that had turned into a useless club. The tragedy of the early M16 lies in the fact that it was an avoidable catastrophe. The weapon Eugene Stoner designed was a masterpiece of lightweight engineering. But by the time the Ordnance Corps and the bean counters at Colt were finished with it, the rifle had been sabotaged by compromise. They changed the powder to save a few cents per round. They skipped the chrome lining to speed up production. They marketed it as self-cleaning to hide the truth about its sensitivity. They took a precision instrument and treated it like a disposable toy, forgetting that in war, there is no such thing as a minor detail. The congressional investigation led by Richard Ichord eventually forced the Army's hand. The transition to the M16A1, with its chrome-lined chambers, proper lubricants, and the addition of the forward assist, finally turned the rifle into the reliable platform it was meant to be. But the stain on its reputation lasted for decades. For a generation of veterans, the black rifle would always be remembered as the plastic toy that failed when the jungle started screaming. It took years of combat in the deserts of the Middle East and the mountains of Afghanistan for the AR-15 platform to finally outrun its ghostly beginnings. Today, the M16 and its descendant, the M4 carbine, are the gold standard for modularity and accuracy. They are the most studied, refined, and battle-proven rifles in history. But the lesson of 1967 remains as vital as ever. A weapon is only as good as the honesty of the people who issue it. You can have the most advanced ballistics and the lightest materials, but if you ignore the soldier in the foxhole, your technology is worthless. In the end, the M16 scandal serves as a grim reminder for every engineer and every general. When you send a soldier into harm's way, you aren't just sending a man with a machine. You are sending a son, a brother, a father. To provide them with anything less than the absolute best, to cut corners on the very tool meant to preserve their life, is more than just a mistake. It is a betrayal. The soldiers found dead with cleaning rods in their hands didn't die because of a bad design. They died because of a lie. And as we look at the sleek, modern rifles of the 21st century, we must never forget the price that was paid in the jungles of Vietnam to get them right. The M16 didn't just evolve, it was forged in the fire of a scandal that nearly broke the American military spirit. It is a testament to the fact that in the world of firearms, engineering is only half the battle. The other half is the integrity to tell the truth, even when it's expensive.